Today on Co-op for Two, our deep dive discussion of Lord of the Rings: Fate of the Fellowship. You're watching Co-op for Two. I'm Jesse. I'm here with Greg.
Thanks for having me on your channel.
All right, so before we get started with this discussion, which will probably be a long one, we should talk a little bit about our history with Matt Leacock, Pandemic, the whole series, because that will frame our interpretation of this game. We're both super fans of Pandemic. Favorite game ever, experience ever is Pandemic Legacy.
Yeah, I think that's true.
You are a huge Lord of the Rings fan. I am not. So that's going to be one area we diverge here. But we both went into this with lots of excitement. I mean, we've been, one of the great things, not just playing Matt Leacock's Pandemic system, but it's just watching the evolution. Every game that comes out, he's experimenting with some new ideas, new mechanics. And this is using a bunch of them from previous Fall of Rome in particular. So where do you,
So it does share some of the DNA of Pandemic. You can see where it comes from. But to me, this game has more differences really than it does share things with it. I think that like if you were to make a chart and you were to say like, okay, Pandemic is 10 and then every other game is like how much like of Pandemic is it, you know? I think almost every Pandemic system game would fall like 8, 9, 10, right? And this one I think is like a 2 because I think it's wildly different. And one thing about this with the theme and stuff, we're going to talk a lot about the theme, is that this game could not be any other game. Like there could be meaning like the way the game operates and the different things that are going on, you can never reskin this to be anything else.
I mean,
that's why I feel
it's interesting you say a bunch of reviewers agree with you. You're not the only one who says that. But to me, when I look at this and Fall of Rome, I see real DNA overlap. I agree. This is sort of taking it to a new level.
Well, I see.
But I can see it.
Fall of Rome is the closest one because you have these tracks and stuff. But it's also very different. Fall of Rome has a lot more in common. The 4 cars, all that kind of stuff, right? Now, this game also, I think, it does take a little bit of DNA from Hot Zone. Which you did not enjoy, but the 2 Hot Zones together, I thought was kind of cool because you play 3 and 3, like you play 2 players.
I hated it, but
you hated it. This one forces you to kind of play more characters for a variety of reasons. So I think it has a little bit of DNA with that, and I think part of that is kind of cool because it does sort of force you to take more members of like Middle Earth, so it feels more like this epic, right? The games I think it shares a more DNA with, maybe in just a conceptual level, is Rebellion in a way, because I think Rebellion is the Star Wars game, very popular for Star Wars game. I think it's like top 30 VG, in the BGG ratings, because that is like, they always say like, I kind of hate this term, but it's like Star Wars in a box, They always say that, right? It's like
for the theme and that stuff.
And I think that War of the Ring is the other one, because War of the Ring is like the Lord of the Rings experience in a box. It's got everything in there. Now, I think we'll talk about this a little bit more, but that game has like a military and a.
Wow, you're going way.
Yeah, I'm going a little
crazy. Way ahead.
So there's multiple things going on there, but I think that's also a competitive experience. It's a lot longer. This is a long game, but that is like could be like a 4-hour game. So I think this is kind of an interesting like alternative to that, and a little more of a remix of that because it is so thematic, I think.
Yeah, I want you to talk about the thematics, especially from your perspective. I wanted to say one last thing about what made this such. I mean, like. I feel like maybe for me, I'm more focused on looking at the design changes and the mechanics and looking at it from a game design perspective. I'm fascinated about that. But the other thing that's fascinating about this, even before we got it to the table, is how it has divided Pandemic players.
Yeah.
And the thing that jumped out to me, I watched Z Garcia's review, and he's like the person that I think of as loving Pandemic as much as we did. He did not like it at all. So I was very curious to see how we would take it and how we would view it differently. And I'm still curious to hear how I'm going to rate it at the end.
So I think like, so moving into like the theme, right, which is what you just kind of said. I think it is for me, and it's interesting because it seems like there are some things that you liked about it, a lot of things you liked, and there's some things that you didn't like about it. But to me, it's surprising to me because I feel like this game is such a love letter to the Lord of the Rings.
Yeah.
And the theme in this is so very important that I feel like this game is, it seems like almost a waste for a person that doesn't know Middle Earth to enjoy.
Yeah, I think you have a point there.
So, and I think like that's one of the interesting things that you did highlight is that like, we have two ways of coming at this. Like, I'm a huge Lord of the Rings fan, and you're not. I kind of refreshed you on some of the events of the films.
Yeah, I mean, I do actually want to comment on that a little bit because I think the theme doesn't matter that much to me, but if you're playing with it did make a difference to my enjoyment that you are able to answer these questions. And then when we get with an objective that's got a story, you can say, oh, this is where this happened. And it lets me get a little bit of that enjoyment. I think it's really true, though, that if the only people in your group playing have no familiarity, boy, that is going to be a tough sell.
Yeah. So, I mean, there's a lot of ways that this... I mean, it's first of all, like just these little things about it, right? Like the box, when you open it up, it kind of makes you think of that horrified thing when the front of it has that thing about the Frankenstein movie on the board itself. I just think that's like such a nice touch. They have like quotes from the book around.
It's a very good so production.
Cool. I mean, this to me is amazing too. Excuse me. Sorry. The only reason that this is important, these numbers at the bottom of the card, is to determine the start player. Yeah. Completely throw away. But every one of these has some like number on there that's completely significant, like the amount of miles Gandalf traveled to get to the Minas Tirith. How many the three hunters traveled to track down and save Merry and Pippin. How many hobbits got killed at the Battle of the Bywater, which is a book thing. I mean, like that to me, like that's the kind of touch where I see that, like, I love seeing that because they didn't have to do that. There's this whole stack of cards.
The whole production,
it permeates everything.
The whole production, man. That dice tower,
and it's because it's so formidable.
The back of the character cards, as you said, the box. It's not just that everything is great and thematic, and the art on the board. We get into how busy it is to read later, but the art is beautiful. There's some beautiful little scenes. I also do appreciate, like, I don't like those kinds of gimmicks, the dice tower stuff, but I really do appreciate that you don't have to disassemble the entire thing to put away. Like, they put some real effort into making that box.
Yeah, I mean, it does. So this is jumping into the components a little bit, but I mean, this, at first I thought, what a nightmare. You're never going to be, but first of all, it's really cool looking, right? I mean, it's thematic. And this is like the Eye of Sauron is over everything. This is a very dangerous place and a dangerous, the Barad-dûr, and it's imposing, when it's next to the board.
And in all fairness, this board is so busy that you cannot roll dice on the board. Sure. You do need...
You take this off the bottom, which is very easy, and this off the top, and it stores easily, in the thing. So I think that's kind of cool. But anyway, at first I thought, there's no way I am putting this together and unputting it together every single time. All right, so...
Are you going to put it back together right now? Okay,
look at that.
You did it. Okay.
Easy peasy. Right. So I think that, like, that's kind of a cool part to it, right? Like, and then, not to go in but the mechanisms of the game, like, it's all about getting Frodo to the Mount Doom and destroying the ring, right? And there's two things kind of happening in the game thematically. There's this war on Middle Earth, which is encompassing all of Middle Earth. And then there's this search for the ring, which is the Nazgul and everything. And you are always concerned with where the Eye of Sauron is, and you're, Eye of Sauron is, and you're always concerned with where the Nazgul are, because you don't want Frodo to get found. Because if he's found, that's where you take the most damage. And every other character, in every other action thing you do, is kind of just postponing and holding off militarily until that happens. And it's such a great representation of that. It's really quite impressive to me.
Yeah, I mean, it is, even not knowing it is impressive. Now, I think you could make a case that when you're balancing simplicity and elegance of gameplay versus theme and narrative, and I think probably from my perspective, a little too much of
Yeah.
the scale.
Yeah.
Like things were sacrificed for theme.
And I think that's the intent, right? Is to make a real
completely fair,
Yeah.
but you have paid a price for this busy board.
I think that's true. I think also in small ways, and there's a lot of ways you're going to be playing to be like, oh, that's very clever. But just even psychologically, going into Mordor at the end of the game is such a huge deal, and it's really dangerous. And once you get in there, you're really worried. And you know what? Thematic, also a thematic home run. And that's not like some explicit card telling you something. It's just naturally the way that is, the mechanisms there create a dangerous situation that like is thematically accurate. And then again, there are all these different movie moments, and book moments, whether you're a book fan, there are moments in the book that are not in the films that are represented here, which is pretty awesome. I mean, these are all, now you only get a few of these, and we'll talk about them a little bit later. Maybe let's talk about my favorite ones. But those are all movie moments, and you're going to get 4 or 5 of them, maybe 6 if you play Legendary. And those are objectives that you have to do that are such cool thematic moments that you see in the thing. And I think we'll talk about them when we talk about the objectives in more depth.
They're all of the objective cards, all of the events are all thematically themed as part of the story. And they tell you, if you don't know the story, they're not going to have any meaning to you, right? They're not like explained. They're just like, this happened. And if you know it, you know it. And if you don't, you don't.
Okay, so I think maybe that's probably could go on quite a long while about the theme. But to me, I mean, it's hard to imagine being able to make a more thematic game. And you can argue that War of the Ring is equal to this, but I don't think you're surpassing it. I think both of these games, and I think you're getting it in a little bit of a smaller package in terms of its everything, really. It's more approachable, I think, to learn, to play, the length of and all that stuff. So,
all right, let's talk a little bit about the components before we get into this board, which is sort of the big subject. A couple of things that I liked. I do like these, what would you call these, silk-screened wooden tokens as opposed to the normal pawns. It's a little bit tricky when you got 2 people of a very similar shape and color playing, and you're like, is that my character? Is that your character? I had to constantly be asking, like, which one is me?
Well, the 2 blue and the 2 brown,
that's
of course.
Right, that's right. It was the 2 blue and the 2 brown, and we never played these. Okay. And I did complain a little bit about, like, these do knock over. They are different heights, but these guys are almost always in the same place. Yeah. And this gets to the board issue. It is beautiful, but it is hard to read sometimes. It's absolutely hard to see where troops are going to move. We'll come back to that maybe at some point. But when these things are all here, sometimes you're like, is that connected? You got to like lift these guys up.
Well, there's a lot of figures in one space.
Yeah. And it's hard. It's hard to keep track of everything.
I think this is definitely like, there's a lot of information on the board, and all of it's necessary, right? But it really, I think, and I don't think they could have done this, but this board should be like 25% bigger. Because there are times, as you say, you have all these Nazgul, and they're cool to have these figures, but it might have been better. I mean, imposing, they look cool. I mean, it's neat, there's 2 different molds of them, but they're in the way a lot. It's hard to see.
They are sometimes in the way.
25% bigger board, I know that's a bigger expense. I know that comes with its own headaches, but it kind of reminds me when we used to play, when I was in high school, we played Axis and Allies, and we made a huge board for it. Because you'd have all these soldiers going into Germany, and you'd be like, okay, nothing can fit. It was a nightmare. And
I think could see a group making a custom
neoprene
board.
Yeah, I could see that. Or they could sell a bigger one. But this definitely, I think, takes up, it's just a lot of information in a very small space. Okay, let's talk a little bit about the ease of play. This game,
there's none. There's no ease of play here, Greg. It's all hard to play. Everything about it.
So yeah, I think you learning the game is not that difficult. I don't think. I mean, there are some things to learn. Coming off that pandemic kind of like basic framework, I think having that as a jump off point, it's not really that difficult to learn. You do maybe have to look up a couple things.
Right.
They do have a lot of these sort of aids that help you with some of the major things, like the battles and the searching, 2 major things, and then, of course, your actions. So they're good reference points. The other thing is that, I know what you're going to say, you didn't mention on the board, is when you set this up, you think this is going to be a nightmare to set up, but everything is printed on the board. Yeah, it tells you a soldier goes here, a soldier goes here to start, Nazgul goes here to start, and it gives you a list, and you can sort of count them as you put them out. and then remember, oh, okay, well, I got 16 and I'm supposed to have 18 shadow troops. So I think setting the board up and everything up is actually not that different
It's
than setting up a game.
remarkably explained well and on the board, except for this inexplicable
There's a weird
one. There's one in the
So if
corner
you look,
that's almost impossible to see.
He doesn't break the line like all of the others do.
Yeah.
You see that they break the line, and for some reason this one is not. He just sits out there, and he's very easy to forget. We did it almost every time we played did the setup.
But I do agree that the board makes it about as easy to set up, and it's not that hard to set. And I agree with what you said about the rules. Like, the rules on paper are not super complex. But when we say that, like you say, the rules on the paper are not super complex, except that they're all on the thing, but there's like 10 times as many rules in front of you to have to deal with on every action.
Well, you have to. Now, this is something that gets back to what you are not a fan of. You don't like controlling multiple characters. I'm kind of used to that when I play a lot of the LCGs. I'll do two-fisted, what they say is I'll have 2 sets of characters. And even like, there's a solo mode, which we kind of looked up a little bit about. We haven't played the solo mode. This is like, you need 2 people to be running this. Because you will forget things.
When we're playing, we're constantly, one person is remembering the things that the other person forgot. It's very easy to forget rules. That's what it is.
And again, I think it sounds like we're saying 2 different things, but a lot of it is sort of intuitive and not that hard to understand. But because there's a lot of information, sometimes when you're playing, you're like, oh, I forgot about this. And every character, normally a character like in a pandemic game or something, would be like, you can, put the research center for free. You can trade. And it doesn't matter. You don't have to have any. And this one is like every character's got 2 or 3 abilities or drawbacks. And then you have 2 of those. And you have
2 of those characters that you're controlling. You have to remember who's going 4, who's going 1. You have to make that decision. And yes, it's not just that. It's that there are lots of rules that are easy to forget. A key rule, like moving this eye when you battle or you build a thing, like it's almost impossible not to forget that sometimes.
And there are the other things that they did, I think, to really make things easy. And like here, like when you turn over the shadow cards, this, we'll talk about why this is important, where the orientation is. But it has a spot here, so when you're done, you will invariably forget often, like, wait, did I draw all my cards? So when you have, like, let's say you're supposed to draw 3 cards. When you're done with this, and your turn is over, then you move it to here.
Yeah.
So there's this empty space, which is very useful because it really does help you to not make that error, I think.
That's consistent with everything we're saying. Like, it could not have been done better. The rules could not have been explained better. Yes. It could not have been clear to be different spaces.
It's just a complicated.
And yet, there's so much to keep in mind, so many little things that it's very easy to forget.
Now, I do want to mention one other thing, because you talked about, often before we played this, about Defenders of the Realm. This is like sort of our, what do they call, that's like your whipping horse, or what do they say?
Yeah,
whipping boy or whatever. But like, that's the game we love to dig into about how terrible that graphic design is.
It's so ironic that we would always say Defenders of the Realm is the example how you do a bad board. It's too busy. It's too hard to read. And Pandemic is the elegant one. And all of it's come full circle. And now this has come out.
I think this is where the Lord of the Rings knowledge comes in. So when you play like Defenders of the Realm, you don't know where this location is because it's like a land you don't know. Yeah. So in Pandemic, you're like, okay, it's Tokyo. Well, Tokyo's over here. You just know where Tokyo is. You know where London is, and etc. Right? Because it's the Earth. We live in the Earth. We know where things are. Yeah. And for me, I know where the locations are in Middle Earth.
It is remarkable that you know these
So
locations.
It's like Emyn Wheel. Boom. Like it's Dunland. Boom. You know exactly where everything is.
Yeah. Now,
right? But you don't know where it is.
That's right. And this is, again, one of these cases where it's not, this is a great point. It's not just that if you don't know any of this lore, you're going to be missing a huge part of the enjoyment. But this is a long game, and if you don't know where these places are with all of these names, it's also going to be a longer game and a more painful process every turn when you're... And again, they did as good a job as they could do, showing you where things are. Yeah, but boy, and when there's lots of things here, this is a time-consuming, error-prone step that's not pleasant. And you're doing it every turn, multiple times per turn.
So this is another kind of like echo of that. This is kind of a cool thing, and we'll talk about this a little more. When you turn this card over to resolve it, if there's a flag here, you do the top half of the card. If there's a flag at the bottom, you do the bottom half of the card. And to this point, it's like even that is complicated. It's not just turn over the card.
One more thing, one more cognitive load to deal with. Little snicks, little cuts by death by a million cuts here with these little things.
We talked about a couple. We kind of did a few reviews today, and we talked a lot about different, like, these games that were really approachable, really easy to play. that were filler type of games or whatever. But this is like an epic game. This is the kind of game you probably get all your friends together and you go through, like, you live those movie moments and you go through and where the locations are and stuff. I think this is leaning into being like an epic, rewarding experience for a fan or fans of this franchise.
It's certainly the heaviest in this whole family. And it's not just the heaviest, but I do think of all of them, this is the one that the more you play it, you will start to learn patterns and strategies. So it rewards serious groups playing it repeatedly.
And it is interesting. These tiny little meeples are kind of cool, and they actually work quite well to move them around and stuff.
You couldn't have them any bigger.
Yeah.
The truth is that I'd be just as happy if all these were colored cubes, including the.
Although I do think this is kind of neat because it really.
Well, it's fun when you see them all.
Although you see
on
now
there,
like this, you can see why you would want to glue these as well. But I do think it helps. Maybe just necessary that they're two different heights. I think just echoing again. I think every single thing you look at, you're like, that probably could have been better. But it's really the best that it could be, right? And given what you could,
it could have been better. But you mean it's not?
I mean, it's not ideal. That's a better way to say it. It's not ideal.
It hurts a little bit, but it couldn't have been done better. I mean, I don't know. Black cubes would have been fine with me, but maybe they'd be a little more readable, but not as fun. It is fun when these things are just
and to feel
swarming.
I mean, because when they're around and you're in that area, that's a real danger. And I'm like, that's kind of like I say, like this is there, these are there. You feel that sort of that danger a little more. Again, I think like this is when you lean into, you say, look, I don't care that the board is a little busy. I don't care that it's a little full. I don't care about this thing and the other thing because we're going all in on theme and we're going all in.
It's done as well as you could do it.
Making this an experience
it's worth it for theme, but you are paying a cost.
Yeah, of course.
Yeah,
and you are paying, I think, for the ease of play. It's a lot of bandwidth. And I think for me, even I guess I will never play this solo. I don't think I'll ever play this solo. It's too much. It's just too much to think about. I'd making way too many mistakes unless I kind of played it, I guess, constantly, and it got to be like kind of a second nature type of thing. But it's a lot to compress. But yeah.
So let me talk a little bit about the basic mechanics and maybe highlight where it's a little different from Pandemic if you're not used to it. Each player now controls 2 characters. There's a whole big set of how many? I mean, there's a lot of characters. So you pick 2, and you've got objectives depending on the difficulty level, less or more objectives. Always one at the end that Frodo has to go into Mount Doom and do the rings. But same basic turn structure as Pandemic. Player takes his turns, picking which character to take 4 and 1, then gets new cards, then the threats advance the shadows, then you switch back and forth. Again, just like in Pandemic, you've got a threat rate that goes up over time so that the game is forcing you to end with a clock. Instead of something you're used to in Pandemic, some instant loss, everything here is based on hope, which goes down when bad things happen, but you can bring it back up when good things happen. And there's no building hospitals, but there are these havens, which you can it's almost like you're curing. You can stop things coming out. These shadow cards are what move things on the board and what brings new stuff out on the board.
Okay, so I think given that, right, like there's 2 major things going on, right? You're trying to stave off the military advance, right? So you have to be able to be fighting and moving around and shoring things up and
maybe mitigating the threat.
That's mitigating the threat.
Half of the game.
And then the other half is like keeping Frodo safe from the Nazgul, right? And because like they're always looking for him, the eye is always there, and you have to be, there's this whole searching mechanism where they're like, if you're in an area with a lot of Nazgul or a lot of enemy soldiers, like you can die like instantly.
You can die instantly
if the eye comes to you and they look for you. And so there's 2 kind of like economies going on, which is something I find to be very interesting in games. We always talk about how these Pandemic style games, cooperative games, there's some kind of busy work you have to be doing, and then there's like the main game, right? But this game has what we like in Flashpoint and some other kinds of games we've talked about in the past, where you at the beginning of the game you pick your characters. Sometimes your characters are picked for you depending on your objectives, but you kind of take them and say, look, this is what I think we should do this game, right? Which I think is really kind of cool because it can completely. I mean, the characters are very different, and there's a lot to each one. Right?
We should spend a moment talking about how true that is. When we play these games, that's one of the things we look for. Does the game play differently depending on who you take? This is ramped up to 11 from normal Pandemic. Pandemic, as it on its own, already forces you to play differently.
Yeah.
But with each of these characters having 2 or 3 different abilities, and they're so different.
Yeah.
And then who you pair it with, you're going to be playing completely different based on who you take.
So, and we did our kind of like, can we, and well, you always like to say it like this, right? Can we break the game type of thing? We always like to do that, where we find some combo of characters we try to like push. And, there's like this aspect of capturing and stuff, of like, if you can capture the enemy strongholds and, then they can't bring out any new troops out. And we found like Gimli and Boromir have powers that worked well together. Gimli can generate these tokens, and Boromir can use them, but use less of them. He doesn't need as many to capture places, and so we thought like, let's kind of play that way.
It is fun cool. With 4. Since you are playing 4, you get the benefits of having that many. So you do have these synergies. You're like, let me mix this with this person. This is another example, though, where like you could see the weight was put a little more on narrative and excitement. Some characters are worse than others. This is not like, let's balance everything. It's like, all right, well, they don't like this guy that much. Just give him the bad ability.
I do think,
what's her name? Gets the ability to like.
Okay. So I do think that they are fairly like there's good and bad for each character. I think there are a couple of characters that I don't think are as strong. However, so before we talk about this, I just want to really fast interject about which I think is one of the really fascinating, one of the probably maybe even the best mechanism in terms of like originality or interest to me.
Okay, let's hear it.
It's the 4-in-1. You got 2 characters, and you can take 4 actions with one and then 1 with the other, or you can do 1 with the other and then 4. And so you're not only picking the order that they go in, but you're picking who gets 1 action, who gets 4, which is really very cool. Depending on where the need is on the board, depending on what your strategy is, you're gonna make different choices, which is really, really cool.
Okay, so I love talking about the new stuff. To me, that's the most interesting. That is absolutely an innovative thing.
Yeah.
As you know, I have much less tolerance for controlling multiple characters. Yes. The key reason why it's doable here for me, why I don't mind it, is the fact that you're dealing with one hand of cards.
Yes,
that to me is absolutely essential.
Yeah.
So that's why I don't normally play two-handed. I think the 4-in-1 works. It absolutely does work. However, having said that, it's a little thematically weird. Like you're putting one guy's gathering something. Like it's a little and this guy's using it, right? Like this guy's getting this, weird. And this guy's using it. Kind of thing, so it's a little weird there. And
just to clarify, like, Jeff, he was talking about like you were using on the last game Boromir and Gimli, as we just said, right? We tried this breaking thing, right. And Gimli on his turn was just generating this token. Right. From like in Dale, he's up in Dale, right. And then Boromir is down in like Gondor.
And he's using it like in that same simultaneously. So it is weird because you're all sharing, but that's a compromise for gameplay that I love because I don't want to have to keep them separate. Yeah. I don't want to have to manage 2 hands and 2 sides. So I like that. But the other thing is, I really wonder about that 4-in-1. What motivates it? Because it almost feels like the reason it's there is because one of your people is not going to have anything to do for most of the game. You're playing Frodo, he's like limping around, he's never doing 4. And we played another, like most of the time that we've played, one of our characters is spending most of their game just camping out somewhere, which is fine. I'm not complaining. You're using their ability at the exact right time. Yeah, I'm not complaining.
But sometimes you may think like, okay, well, this character has been doing a lot of work down here, but now is when I need the other character, so you switch to that character. It's kind of like having it's a really unique situation. It's almost like having this is my main character, this is my auxiliary character, but you have the ability to switch at will.
Yes, I agree with you. The only thing that I wonder is, I wonder if what motivates it. Like, was it motivated by its more interesting and interesting decisions to do 4-in-1, or if it was that, hey, a lot of the time this person's going to have nothing to do. Yeah. And we can solve that by saying you always only have one action by one character. So I don't know if it's the horse before the cart. I don't know what that works, but it works. It does work.
So I'm going to tell you another reason why this works, why this whole system works. Okay.
Is that what we're doing here? We're talking about why it works.
I don't know. This is where it's going.
We'll do we'll go where we want.
So we're discussing this, but I think you mentioned about having the one hand of cards.
Yeah.
From a game, we love talking about game design, obviously. So from the one, you're saying that for you this would never work, but you have the ability to have one hand of cards.
Yeah.
And that's why it works, right?
Absolutely.
I think the other reason why this works in terms of other pandemic games is because in other pandemic games you're flying around with your cards and stuff. It's very different the way you move around in this game.
Yes.
But in this game, you can always bring as many other characters with you when you move. And that I think is another thing. So it's interesting. Like I probably wouldn't read a book about this or anything, but it would be really kind of interesting to pick the brains of someone,
Matt Leacock has written a design diary about it.
Oh, has he? Okay.
Yeah. It's not huge.
I'm like, it'd be interesting to read it. I'm never going to read it, but it's cool to think of was this game, was he just like, this doesn't work. I can't make, and then you're like, oh wait, if I just allow you to bring, because that seems broken because you can move you can move like 4 characters across the whole, 4 spaces away together. And then one more with one of those other characters if it's your alternate character. But I mean, like, there's so many.
It creates some interesting decisions. In fact, the last game we played, we're trying to coordinate who could go with who.
Yeah.
And again, the other reason why that's interesting, it's all of this action economy. Like, you're like, we got to split up because we got to deal with all these threats. But then maybe there's 1 or 2 times during a game when we would really benefit moving all together. And all of their special abilities sometimes let one person travel better than another person, so they're more efficient.
Well, there's some
trade-offs. It is a very interesting additional rule. Yet another new rule that gets added to the system to keep in mind. But I agree, that works.
I think that was really what really sets this apart. Because I think you don't want to just play like 2 characters.
That far.
Well, I mean, this game is.
We don't use it that often.
Every turn, you don't use your 4 and 1.
No, you shifted from 4 and 1 to move together.
Sure. I'm sorry, I'm thinking back to the 4 and 1.
Oh yeah, the controlling 2 characters.
Those 2 things in concert, along with your hand, it allows you to play in a more epic way. You have more characters. You have more. You're getting more. You're using more of the characters in the world because it's a big, robust world. And honestly, you don't get to play Theoden King, but you basically get everybody else. I know that I'm probably forgetting another character, but you get so many characters to pick from, and they're very different. And I do want to mention, because there's so many interesting choices, both thematically as well as. So we said there's one of the characters is like one of the tasks is to get Frodo there. Well, it's very difficult because you're getting searches all the time. If you bring Gollum, it changes the way you play completely because Gollum can take Frodo and he can really sneak him in, which is thematically a home run, right? And it's really kind of fun.
And completely changes the way you play Frodo and all that.
But they also have these drawbacks, which is so cool. If you enter a space with troops, he's like, we hates them, and you can't go in those spaces. That you'll lose hope from that, which is a big price to pay. So there's these like drawbacks. And Boromir has this drawback as well because of the temptation of the ring, very thematic. But, when you're playing with Gollum, you're playing completely differently because you've really got Frodo, like, you've got some real help for him versus like other characters, which thematically I think is very, very cool, and it's a neat thing. And then the other thing is,
let me just jump one more thing here that's interesting. Like one of the odd sort of downsides, depending on how you look at it, is you've always got to take Frodo. He's always got to get this task. We'll get to that more. But one of the benefits of that is that all these other characters can synergize with him. And play off him differently, and the game design can say, okay, we know this character is always going to be in it, so Gollum has special rules. Pip has a special rule. Like Merry and Pip have a special rule with him. Like they can all play off the fact that we know he's going to be in there, and there's a lot of that synergy.
The other character that I think really is very interesting because it's like, and it goes along with this 1 and 4, is Galadriel. And this is why it's like such an so she's a fascinating character to play in this game. She's probably the most interesting.
Powerful.
Now, in Fall of Rome, it's the most magical character in any game I've ever played ever. Because there's a set rules in Fall of Rome, okay? Just it's like a board game. You have set rules with the way everybody acts. And there's a character that can take event cards, because you don't use
unused
all of them,
event cards
out of the game and bring them in that do huge things that kind of break rules of the game, you know? And it's like, that's a wizard to me. That's a mage or whatever. That's the most magical thing I've ever seen in a game, because it's like a magician, right, is doing things that you shouldn't be able to do. They're doing mystical things that are completely out of the ordinary and crazy and unexpected. And that is the most accurate portrayal of any wizard in any game I've ever seen.
Not only that, Galadriel, she's a wizard, that woman?
No, she's not. Well, I mean,
okay,
she
so
does
I don't know
magic.
what you're talking about
the elves have magic.
Okay, magic. All right,
Yeah,
but
elvish magic.
one of
Yes,
this is everything is cost and benefit. So one of the decisions that was made is to put all of this text and special rules, not just on the characters, but on all of the objectives. But because of that, one of the benefits is things like that. Not just that, but there's an objective where Gandalf goes away for a little bit of time, comes back with powers. There's one where you can switch characters, like game-changing stuff. Those objectives can be full of game-changing stuff because they're all on this card.
So Galadriel is she has that ability, and it's a cost. You got to spend a green card out of your hand, which are really, really useful when you're going to get into Mordor. They're the sneak card, right? And she has the ability to grab these events out, which is super, super magical and powerful because she's one of the most powerful figures in Middle-earth. She can
grab events and look at cards.
So
that character is so overpowered. But I don't want to use that overpowered. She should come. If we're really bringing the ring, I would take her.
What she has is she can use the mirror.
Leave Gimli home. He can tend to the fire. Bring this woman with us.
So she has the mirror of Galadriel, which what's in the mirror. Some things that are, some things that were, some things that have not yet come to pass. Okay. So she can see the future, right? She can see what are some possibilities, and for an action, you can look at the top 4 cards of the deck. And mechanism-wise, this is very powerful because if you're playing 2-player, you can set the next 2 hands. I don't want, I want you to get these cards, and I need these cards. If you're not winning this game, take Galadriel.
Yeah.
Now, the other thing that's cool about it thematically, not only is that a home run for the Mirror of Galadriel, you show me a better Mirror of Galadriel in this game, is that you can use her as the 1 character, right, instead of the 4-action character. She just sits in Lorien, and every turn that's her action is to funnel those cards around and offer her help from afar, which is what she does in the books and films, right? She's never in intimate contact with the enemies and stuff like that. So she's doing that, and then the other character is using their full suite of 4 actions.
And that happens a lot. That's also why the 4-in-1 isn't so much of a cognitive overload. In a game full of cognitive overload, because that one character, normally you're not doing that much with them. They're using their power to very good effect, not having to move around.
So if this wasn't a Lord of the Rings game, and we were just designing a new board game, you could see a very similar system. This is kind of a cool thing, I think, where you could say, look, you're going to start the game. This is with 2 things. Now, each character has 3 different actions on them, right? You're going to take one as your major character, your main character, and then you're going to take the other one and slide it in a way where you can only see one of the abilities, and you're going to gain one. It's that's the auxiliary move. Does that make sense?
Yeah,
that would be a really cool mechanism.
Anything where you're making decisions offline to play the game, I like.
Yeah.
So I love the idea that you would make. Well, we talked about one idea for playing that's like this, which is a mode where there's so many objectives. You could pick your objectives and then tech against it. Then say, who should we take to attack this? But anything where you're deciding ahead of time, having to make choices before you play,
which is really cool,
to attack a certain puzzle, I really like. So I like your idea.
Yeah, when you start the game, you can so leaving that aside, which is a free idea if anybody wants it. But leaving that aside, I think it's kind of cool that yes, in the beginning of the game you say, look, we gotta stop the enemies and we gotta get Frodo to Mordor. Who's doing what? I do think it just for bandwidth, better to have one person with Frodo and Gollum, or with Frodo and another character that's going to help him. One person should be in charge of getting to Mordor, and the other people should be cleaning the board, I think. Don't you think that might be?
The one person does have to be in charge. You don't have an option, really.
Right, but
Frodo is walking his way slowly. He's never going to get that much help.
Right, but I'm saying one person's task is to gather the cards and things needed to get through to that. I think that kind of helps. That helped us anyway.
Yeah, but I'm just saying it's not an option, is it? That's the only way to play it.
No, you could say Frodo is going to make his way, and all the other 3 to 5 or 8 characters or whatever are going to do whatever they want. I'm saying in the beginning of the game, it's kind of like when you play. Again, this is using this Flashpoint thing to say, look, I'm going to rescue people. This person's going to rescue people. This person's going to get hazmat. That's my job. I'm going to clear things. And then your two characters are just going to fight the fire.
Well,
right? You can kind of do that sort of a thing here.
Yes. Well, is this the right time to talk about the objectives and some of the issues? Okay, so there's a lot to love here, but there are some things that are a little weak for me. And one of them is on the games we played, like we get these objectives. They're interesting. They're all very different. Again, a lot of bandwidth because every objective is like, here's a page explaining the special rules how to do this. But very rarely are we actually cooperating on anything. It feels to me like it's like, all right, you go do this one. I'll do this one, I'll do this one, and that's it. You got to go on your separate way, and you have to divide them up, and that's a little bit missing. Pandemic, there's some interesting decisions like, we got to meet up and trade this. It's so important.
You do trade some cards.
A little bit, but not that much here. You're working with your other character a lot, but with the other players, it's more like dividing up the tasks, which could be good or bad.
I do think... Now, having said, I do think that like, even if it's one person's task to do one or the other, I felt like every turn of this game, we played of this game, like every turn, we've not been like, I'm going to do this, this, and this. And then you're like, okay.
No, you're right.
We have had a complete discussion. I mean, but that's almost too much for some people, probably.
Well, no, that's an understatement.
Yeah.
Lots of people do not want that.
Yeah.
They do not want a game where they've got to consult for their move. But you can play that without consulting.
I'm just saying, like, there's a lot to consider, and there's a lot of plans being pitched, right? No, I think this is the way to do it. I think that's the way to do it. Right?
It's true. I mean, actually, that's not a bad point, actually, that this is a little bit of a middle ground. Like, if you were with a group that wanted not to be bothered, you could say, this is your task.
Yeah, that's true.
And you don't have to coordinate too much.
That's true.
You're not going to play as optimally. But it's not a game where you would have to coordinate every move. You could say you're in charge of this.
Yeah, I think that's true. I mean, you're probably not going to win, and that's inherent in a cooperative game. It's in the name. You have to cooperate. And I think this whole alpha thing, right? Always this alpha thing, right? Like you got to fight the alpha player, and it's like, well, you have to cooperate.
That's we don't play that
so
way.
Don't play cooperative
I'm not so sure, though. I think you could probably play most of this game dividing up objectives.
I think that's probably true.
And just get together for the end. But I do agree with you. Like, at some point, you're going to have to micro-coordinate stuff.
A few things about these objectives.
Yeah, let's talk more about the objectives.
Number one, I think that it's really very cool that they give you some starter ones. They're like, take this.
Some sample sets.
Take this 4, take this 4. Then there's a bunch where you take 5 each, and then there's like a legendary one for 6. But you can just mix them up and take whatever. Sometimes they are, mandatory to take a certain card, like certain character. Fighting the Balrog, you have to take Gandalf, etc. Right? And I think, but they're all like super thematic. You're not going to get to do all the events of the Lord of the Rings, right? In one game, but over the course of many games, you're going to be able to do those sorts of things. I think.
Yeah, I mean. So the objectives are a little bit of a hit and miss for me. Yeah. They're a little mixed. I mean, first of all, I do love the design idea. Yeah. I love the idea that you've got it's not just that you have these objectives. It's a great way to scale the game.
Yeah.
But they do have something I love, which is there's some benefits. So you're often saying, well, if we can get this done, we could get this benefit. And they are narrative, they've got story, but a couple hits against them. First of all, I do think that the benefits are very minor. They're almost all throwaway benefits. One hope or a couple troops. And I think that's a missed opportunity because I really love the idea of making a hard decision about what goal to go for because you have to consider if we do this, we get this benefit. And I think most of these objectives, you're going to go for the one that you can do right away and that's easiest and that you're near, and you are not going to be doing interesting decisions about it.
So a couple things. Number one, they do change every game significantly. Depending on the objective you have, you're going to play very differently. So they are going to give you...
That's saying too much.
I think you're going to have...
The characters completely. the objectives, do they really change how you play? They change what you have to go do.
Yeah, in any given game.
They don't really change how you play or what the experience is.
Well, I'm just saying it's different goals, and they create a whole different thing that you have to go do.
They force you to do
something
things.
Differently. And depending on how the mix is. And I think that's a lot of variety. And even I think if you go through all of their suggested ones, I think you might even have some left over. I mean,
variety is huge in this game.
Huge,
with the characters, the number of characters.
And it's interesting because
mostly, except for the end.
Yeah, we'll talk about that. So I think that like this is such a really cool way to say it's another design thing, right? This is like another really clever design thing, I think. I think that 4-on-1 was great. I think that, again, that was one of the big things. This I think is like a really smart way to approach a problem of such a huge game. You say, look, it's all about destroying the ring. That's what the Lord of the Rings is about. So you always do that. However, the game is also, there's a lot of events that happen in Lord of the Rings. There's a lot of characters. So some games you're going to do, you're going to do 4 to 5 different things that you're going to do that happen in the stories. And some games you're going to do, different ones than others, right? So you're going to, after a lot of plays, you're going to be doing all those different things. But it's going to keep things, I think, kind of fresh because some of them, they really change. I mean, we had to take Minas Morgul, and that was a huge thing that changed the way that we did the end of that game. You disagree?
You just get there and fight it. I think the objectives are largely a miss for me.
Yeah.
I mean, as an idea, great. Yeah. It's just that they're like, fight Smaug, and then you're like, oh, okay, put Smaug. 2 things here and 3 things here and roll the dice. And if you get this thing, you're horribly damaged. And if you roll well, there's lots of mitigation.
Smaug has been dead before 80 years before the events of the Lord.
Well, who was it?
Yeah,
Balrog. It was the Balrog.
Okay,
anyway,
let's talk about
that. The point is that for me, the objectives have a very high cost in each one is unique. Each one needs reading and understanding the rules. Sure, they're not particularly hard, but they also don't really require different strategy. They don't feel very thematic to me. They're like, the story title is great, but actually you're like, just make 3 piles of this or have a fight here. I don't think they change the way you play the game. They just they may send you different places, a couple tactical decisions, but I think it's a miss. I would have liked to see them be more involved more planning, not just be like, okay, I'm close to that, I'll go there and do that.
Okay, so I completely disagree. Okay. I think depending on the objectives, you have to take specific characters and you have to do something wildly different than one of the other. They're all very, very different, and they make you go about playing the game completely differently. Each game is completely different based on what kind of objectives you're doing. So I couldn't disagree more. So I think thematically, it's a great way to include all of the events of Lord of the Rings and not overwhelm things anymore. Yes. It's a great way to create variety. It's a great way to force you to take certain characters that you might not want to take. You might be like, well, I never really play Merry and Pippin because I don't think that that's strong or whatever. But it forces you to take them.
It forces you to take them. It does force you to take them. It forces you to take them just to force you to take them. It's not like, here's a challenge and you should figure out who's the best to tackle that challenge. It's like, go here. Oh, guess what? You have to bring Gimli. And you're like, all right, I guess I got to bring Gimli when I play this game.
I think some of them require specific characters.
Poor Gimli. I hope I'm not going to get on some bad list.
Yeah. But I think I think this is one of the areas of the game that this is why I say this game I don't think is that great for people that are not into Lord of the Rings.
That might be the
you
best
are missing
example.
So much in this. And I'm gonna give a couple of examples. You said about the Gandalf, and we actually we were walking around after we played this game for the first couple of games. We were walking around kind of talking about it, and you were like, what do? You go in, you fight the Balrog, you roll a few dice, and that's it. But that's not it. You have to do it with Gandalf. And after you do it, you can lose a lot. It's a big moment. If you roll really badly or whatever, you have a bad moment and you don't have the cards you needed to do it, you could lose the game right there, which is accurate. The Balrog could have ended the Fellowship. But the great thing is, when you succeed, you remove Gandalf from the board. You don't get to be him for a while. When the next kind of epidemic card, which is called the Siege of Darkness or something like this, then you bring him back out, you put him in Lorien, and now he's Gandalf the White. And he's got upgraded abilities. He's stronger, and you gain hope because just his coming gives you hope. And I think removing your piece from the game for you don't know how long because you think he's dead, and then you're like, oh wow, look, Gandalf's back. Oh, he's more powerful. That is a home run to me.
Well, it's thematically a home run but it's odd design decision to be like, you roll these 3 dice, you're either going to get nothing and have no hope lost, or lose the game instantly. To me, that is the wrong place on the scale for me. I don't want that kind of swinginess, but this is a perfect example where if you know the lore and the thematic, then you've got a giant deck of fun stories to be like, oh, I remember that, I remember that.
I'm just going to do one more, and that is Aragorn. He has to go from Edoras. He has to go from Edoras to Eric.
You must take Aragorn. Yeah. He must go to this specific place. Yes.
So he leaves from Edoras. He goes, takes the Paths of the Dead, which is here, which requires stealth.
Right.
Okay, that's cool. Then you get to Eric, the Stone of Eric, and he has to like summon the army of the dead. He has to get all the Oathbreakers. And when he does this, you put 3 Gondor soldiers in this space. And then this is a difference in the films and the books, is in the books, he gets the Oathbreakers and he brings them to Peligir, because that's where all these ships are coming up, and then he has to defeat that fleet before they can reinforce the enemy at Minas Tirith. In the films, they do away with that and they just have them bring the army of the dead to the Pelennor Fields. Okay, but in this, you put extra people at Umbar and then you move them all up here, like they took their ships up to Peligir. And so you take Aragorn down here and you have to fight them, and you have the army of the dead. You have these Gondor soldiers, which are technically Gondor because that's what they were before they broke their broke their oath and became, these shades or whites or whatever. That's so cool to me. Like, that is thematically very interesting. And by the way, the 2 things I just pointed out are completely different, and that's just 2 of the goals. That's why I think they're like very different.
Well,
different tasks.
I think thematically it's a wonderful story. In terms of gameplay, it's like 3 cubes come out. You have to go here, and then 3 cubes come out, and you go fight them. They're taken care of like that in one turn. It just doesn't add anything to the game, but narratively, it's a great way of introducing. That's my position. Narratively, it's wonderful to add all these little stories.
I think if you were to, it's enough discussion of that, I guess. But yeah, I think personally, like, it's a win in a number of different ways. But I think the thing that maybe you and I agree on in terms of the objectives, by the way, that's another cool thing, is they put little stars on the ones that you would be using as your intro, and the stars on the one that you always take. So that's the part where we kind of agree a little more, is that you always must take Destroy the Ring.
I mean, that's where we agree is a weak point here.
Yes, so let's talk about that a little bit.
Okay, so let me lay out the basic problem as I see it. This is a long game. Like 2-hour plus game with 2 players, and there's so much variety in the game, but not just one of your goals. The very last goal to achieve is Frodo must make his way. He always starts in the same place. He must make his way into Mount Doom and throw in 5 rings and do it. Now, what that means in effect is that basically the second half of the game can feel very samey. No matter what happens, the whole punchline, the whole finale is going through this exact route, doing this basic exact process. And if it was quick, if it was like play all this variable stuff and then in the last 5 minutes you do this, that would be one thing. It does feel like a big chunk of the game is sort of going through that same identical second half.
So I would disagree that the second half is like, I wouldn't say that much, but I would say, really in a 2.5-hour game, probably the last 40 minutes is going to be like figuring out how you're getting into Mount Doom and everything. But I mean, again, I think just to be like a broken record.
You say figuring out, but you just mean like getting enough cards to go in the exact same way.
Sure,
like there is another technical way in.
Well, I mean, like there is kind of. I mean, like this is the kind of thing I was talking about Rebellion before, right? When you play Rebellion, you're like, oh well, in this one, like the Emperor took, like corrupted Chewbacca. Now Chewbacca's working with the Empire, and like. There's just these different things. Han blew up the Death Star. What you have these different like variations on the theme, and this was kind of like the last game we played. We took Faramir and Boromir and Frodo in and like attacked. We took troops into like through the path of Cirith Ungol here, and we went in there and the Hidden Stair, and we fought in Minas Morgul. And that's kind of cool to me because that was a different variation, and that was a different way to do it. Most of the time we played, we would just get Frodo enough stuff and he would kind of go in alone, but Faramir has a talent for getting past this stuff, which is really kind of a difference, right? So there is a slight difference, but ultimately I would say the last 30 minutes of the game is going to play out very similarly than all the other games. And I think this is, again, not to be a broken record, but this is what the opportunity cost of making a game that's so thematic. Because at the heart of this whole game, the whole point of the Lord of the Rings, at this, like, is to get for Frodo to destroy the ring. And of course, in the books, there's a whole third of the Return of the King afterwards, fine. But like, what most people understand about it is that's the thing. And so that is the main quest. It's always going to be the main quest. And so it would really feel anticlimactic if, like, you didn't have the One Ring and you did like a bunch of other little goals around. You're like, okay, that's it. We did it. Like,
well,
I think that you lose too much from that.
Well, it's yet another example of this pattern where a choice was made to keep to the theme at a little bit of a cost. I don't agree, though, that maybe you can't tell the whole epic story if it doesn't end with him throwing the rings. But you could say every game doesn't have to be telling that same epic story. Maybe you have different end stories, and you say this game we're going to play, it's not just these three throwaway objectives, but here's the one main objective that you're going to have to plan your whole game for. It shouldn't always be. I'll bet there's some expansions that where the end objective isn't.
Well, we discussed this a little bit. Most of the characters are in here, but you could see Theoden coming in. You could see Treebeard and the Ents. There is one card that represents the Ents in here. There's actually a really cool event that moves any one character to any location. It's the Eagles. They come in and move somebody. But they, if you move Frodo, you move like all these Nazgul to him, and you have to do a search, and you almost certainly be killed. And that's kind of to show like you can't bring.
There are fun little. There's a lot more
to Mount Doom that way, right?
There's a lot more caveats in this game with all the events and special abilities. They're always like, yeah, you could do this, but also if you end up in this situation, you have to pay extra.
So I think, like, yes, that is the one thing. Now, I think, like, Lord of the Rings, the War of the Ring, that game, I think there is, and I don't know if you can do...
I think you're right. Military victory.
I think you can win... it's hard to imagine that game can end without destroying the ring. But I think that maybe there is a military victory you can achieve.
An alternate.
And I wonder... And again, I think this would be against the theme, but it would be kind of cool if you could push, even if it was much more difficult, just for a change, to try to win in a military way,
win condition.
like wipe all the things out, and he doesn't have any army anymore.
It is fun. It is. Well, I think you're getting at something actually really quite interesting. It's a little bit side discussion, but let me talk about it.
When we do it, that's the whole point of this.
Yeah. So I suggested like it would be nice to have a different goal that you might get, and you suggested something slightly different now, which I think is important and is kind of missing here. Like you said, it would be nice if there was an alternate way. One of my very favorite things about Pandemic when you play is you're frequently in a situation where, like, it's not a different way to win. Winning is still the same, but it really is a decision point where, like, could we eradicate this disease? Yeah. Like, it's going to cause us to change our strategy, but we would get so far ahead. It's like making this big, giant branching decision. Yeah. And there's none of that here. Something like that feels like it would be nice. Like your idea of having like two ways to win, or something you could do. Like maybe you could choose to have different ways to get into a Mordor or or something else that you could do that would give you a larger planning decision. Because right now you're sort of like, we're going to plan to walk him in like that. It would be nice to have a more interesting, longer term planning element. I've got something else I want to ask your thoughts on.
Yeah, sure.
So I've seen some of the reviews because I'm so curious about what people like.
I haven't watched a single one.
Okay, well, one of the common complaints to people is that you've got this finale. So you've got to walk Frodo in and he does his thing. And then what happens at the very end? Once you get him in, he throws the 3 rings. What happens? What happens?
You make a roll.
You make a roll. So some complaints like, we're playing for 2 hours, we do it,
3 hours,
and then we roll the dice, and we could get bad luck and roll the dice and lose. What are your thoughts on that?
So, I mean, like, I think, again, not to be a broken record, but I mean, like, this is like, this quest is a Hail Mary. So thematically, it makes sense. Whether or not that's enjoyable or not, I think is another thing. So is it enjoyable? Well, I think, when we've won this game, we have planned to go in and have it set up so that we are able to survive a roll. I mean, like, you have enough rings to re-roll something. Maybe you have like an event like Tom Bombadil that allows you to re-roll 3 dice. Maybe
If your hope is high, you don't roll. You
maybe
barely roll
you've
at all.
bolstered your hope up enough so when you go in, because you're going to roll 7 dice, right? If you have 8 there's if you have 8 hope, you can't lose, right? So I think there is a lot of that
as long as there's no Nazgul
in there. But yes, generally we know in it thematically and game wise, you got to go in and be one go. Yeah. When you get into Mordor, you got to go in and you got to complete it. That's why I thought that Minas Morgul. There's a couple event ones there that make it really much more difficult. So I think that's really what you have to do, and you're planning for that moment like so much. And I think that does have a cost of not being able to like that. The design always hems you into that finale, and I can see that getting old. I do think, you could get poor luck and roll very poorly, but I think like you should not go in, unless you're really ready, right? Like I think
I'm completely on the same page. I would say it even more extreme. Yeah. I think the complaint that it comes down to a dice roll is completely wrong. Yeah. Completely wrong. First of all, yes, it's super thematic, but it's also not. If you go in there with one hope. Yeah. And no tokens, you should expect to lose. That's not losing on a random die roll. Yeah. That's losing because you've taken the longest shot you could possibly take, and you should lose. There's so much in this game that you could, if you've played it, if you've had a good game and prepped, then you're going to be able to most likely succeed. So I think that's that critique. I think it completely.
That's like saying like you have no control up to that moment.
Or it's like saying I lost in poker because the other guy got dealt a better hand. I mean, you planned it. You've got all these decisions you're making up into that point. That's just...
Yeah, I think that like this is like it, again, it's like you played the whole thing. You made your decisions. That die roll is not just coming out of nowhere, right? Like you're supposed, that's, if you are doing very poorly and, the game is like it's going against you big time. It's like any game of Pandemic or any cooperative game. It's ratcheting its strength against you, and you're in a worse and worse spot, and then you make a run for Mount Doom, and you just make a Hail Mary roll, and you lost. Well, I mean, you're probably going to lose anyway.
Yeah, if you don't like that, then play where you have to have 8 rings to get in. Yeah. And then you just don't get allowed. You aren't allowed to roll the dice. So I think that critique is off the mark.
Yeah. So I want a couple other just random things I want to talk about. I do really like this, and I know that there's a cost to this as well. I think this is kind of a cool thing. You turn over this card, you activate this part, because one half of it is moving troops around, and the other half is adding troops.
It's time to talk about the movement of troops and all that stuff, because this, to me, is the worst part of the game. This is a real problem. It's done as well as can be done, but it's not just that it's hard to read that. No. It's that the randomness that this creates in not being able to predict enemy movement. Let's talk about this for a second. All right, so to me, this is the biggest problem with this game, and it is a real problem. It's very hard to see what's going on in the board, where even the situation. It's hard to see what's at threat. It's very hard to see where things are going to move. But then to add to that, the fact that you don't know on these cards if this is going to trigger the movement or if this is going to trigger, means that you have a very hard time predicting where the enemy troops are going to put things at risk. And that means it's sucking away a good deal of planning from the experience. And this is the part I love most about Pandemic. The part I love most about Pandemic is having an intuitive statistical understanding of that deck and being like, these are the areas at risk. We've seen them. They're going to come up again. We've shuffled, put it on top. Those areas are going to get hit again. How big a risk are we taking? If a card comes out from the bottom, it's going to be at a place we've never seen before. All of that stuff, to me, is the most enjoyable part about Pandemic, that we can reason about the odds. And it feels to me, especially with this up and down thing, and how hard, and how busy, and how confusing it is, that you basically lose that.
So I have 2 thoughts about this. One which agrees with you and one which disagrees with you.
Okay.
So the part that agrees with you is this. Normally when you get in Pandemic, you get the Epidemic, as you just described. You take it off the bottom, you shuffle the discard and put it on top. So like what is in the pool. So when you're like, okay, before we shuffle this, let's look at the cards. Okay, we got this is a problem, this is a problem, that's a problem. So you shuffle them up and you put them on the top of the deck. So in this version, you really can't extrapolate that because you don't know which of the top or the bottom is going to happen. So
and even if you did know, it's very hard to see where things would move.
Correct. Yes. So I think you've got something there that it is harder to plan when that happens. And the thing where I disagree with you is, again, like predictably going to come down to an idea of the state of the world of this, franchise. So, it's weird. I'm going to bring up. Did I bring up Axis and Allies earlier? I'm going to bring it up again. Did I bring it up again?
Awful. We have everything you see here. We have the 3 hours worth of discussion.
So Axis and Allies. No, I did because I talked about the bigger board. I did talk about Axis and Allies here. Okay, so weirdly, I haven't talked about Axis and Allies in years and years and years, but here we are. So I mentioned this to you offline, though I did. We talked about like in the beginning of Axis. This is a simulation, right? It's a recreation of World War II. Okay, so you are going to make different choices and things are going to go slightly different, but there are predictable things that are going to occur, and because this is a simulation of the War of the Rings, that story, right, that event. And so in Axis and Allies, at the beginning, you set up the board, you put a ton of ships around Pearl Harbor, right, around Hawaii. There's a Japanese fleet right next to it. Japan goes first. Every time they move in and they like wipe out that fleet. And when you're the U.S. player, you're like, how could this happen? But it's going to happen because that's what happens, right? And so you see some of these more predictable things occur in the game. And you watch, like, U.S. is like building up all its military strength, but it's not helping very much until later in the game. But once it moves all of its people across the ocean, and as a German player, you're like, yeah, I know that's going to happen. I know I have a limited amount of time before the U.S. brings a whole load of troops over, and now I got to deal with that. Because that's what happened in history. And so that's mechanism-wise, that's what's going to happen, that you're going to have to plan for and deal with. And in this game, I think there is a large similar part to play that. I know the soldiers, when they come out of Mordor, they're going to come out of here, and they're going to go to North Ithilien, and they're going to go into Osgiliath, and they're going to come to Minas Tirith. You know these routes. You know the Isengard orcs are going to come down to Helm's Deep. There is an understanding of that movement. I know the major movements that are happening. You're bringing the Southrons are coming up, but they're going into this whole Minas Tirith area.
Random cards can divert them from their thing. But
there are surprises that can happen.
I think you've got a point.
But I think this is another thing where I predictably know that there's no real way into Mordor except for through the Black Gate or through the secret stairs or in Securith Uncle. And and then I know that the assault in Middle Earth is going to take place in a certain couple of ways. And so that to me leads to I know where the hammer I know where the hammer is going to fall. And so if I were playing this solo with another fan, we might say, okay, Minas Tirith, we got to build it up, get a lot of people here for that. There's certain things you can't expect. And I think that is the part of it that is true to the story. And of course, like anything, and really, you don't want the game to be too predictable. You want those moments. I mean, when the last game we played, something moved a couple soldiers, and we were a little unprepared, and they kind of took a couple of areas that really surprised us, and it was really it was kind of game ending in a way.
Well, I want to agree with a bunch of what you said. I think you've said some very perceptive stuff. The first thing that you said, which I think is very true here, is we talked about the pandemic roots here. But the war game roots here are actually quite strong. Yeah. And one thing that you just mentioned, starting out Axis and Allies with the troops around Pearl Harbor, this game sets up the same way. A big half of the setup is fixed. Yeah. You're always putting a whole bunch of these troops. So in that sense, the game is said it's to create a little bit of the narrative, but it also creates a little bit of predictability about where things are. And I still stand by the fact that there's too much randomness in the movement to track.
I agree with that.
But I do think that you are right about something, and it speaks to the weight of the game and how much this game would reward replayability. I do think if you were stuck on a desert island for the rest of your life, this is the game that would reward playing over and over again, because I do think you would learn routes, you would learn major thoroughfares, and you may not be able to track the way you can in Pandemic. But for example, if there's no activity up in here, you probably say, well, for this game, that area is probably pretty safe. But if those cards come up early in the deck, you could say, look, I'm not going to be able to predict exactly where things are going to come out, but I know that they're going to be pouring out of Rune more than they're going to be pouring out of wherever. So I do think you would, over time, develop a better understanding of patterns and get better at it.
So there's a few other last couple of items that I want to point out that are, I think, of interest to the game. Number one is this idea of the havens.
Yeah.
Okay, so, well, there's a couple different spaces that are interesting. And why moving around becomes interesting is because there are certain areas that you can muster troops, right? And you can only muster troops in these spots. So there's a lot, most of the board, you cannot just spawn troops. Makes it a little difficult.
Yeah, it's weird. You can't just fight on your own. You have to have troops, and it's hard to raise troops.
And if the enemy is in a what they call havens, and there's no one there to oppose them when the turn is over, then they will turn into an enemy stronghold that's been captured, and you'll lose 3 hope. Now, you can do the same thing with the enemies, right? And you can rescue or liberate a city, but you only get 2 hope back. So it's sort of you can never get to a balance there. And so I think that was a very cool choice, because when you turn something into a haven, that doesn't produce enemy troops ever again, which, as you mentioned before, that's kind of a cool strategic thing. You're like,
only certain places, not every place where there's a haven is that true. They don't come out of all of them.
So all of the areas that that troops will come out of, you could technically take over and prevent troops from coming out again.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Which is kind
except for mortar.
Well, mortar you could do, but it's very difficult to do. It's not possible. Okay. Right. Like, it's theoretically, like, you could put all your effort to do it, but it's not really going to happen, right? But I think that's kind of a cool thing. But and this is one of those things I think, like, about game design and stuff, that I find kind of cool, is how there are little rules that change everything in a game. You know, like, we talk about some of those games where it's like, when a game, you can't move twice, you can only move once. You can't repeat an action. Like, that's such a huge, like, it completely changes the design. And the thing in this game, you can never remember it, by the way. It's kind of funny. It's one of the 2 things you can remember is that if you can't just move your character, you have to have a troop to be able to either liberate or turn an enemy into, and that is, like, it makes it so that, like, that's one of those things where, like, it turns the game completely different. Because if you could do that, like, there's so many times, like, oh, I'll just walk through the city and make it. No, but you have to, like, go and find a troop, or you have to grab.
Really change the game. You just gotta remember. It's just more to remember.
No, but I mean, but I mean, like, in terms of, like, moving into here and having to liberate it, you can't. You have to make plans to go get a soldier or something. I think that has impact. I think at least 5 times in every game, I'm like, oh, I could go no, I can't. I need a soldier from somewhere. I think that's just one of those things that changes.
Very interesting comment. Like you said, like, I think the Haven stuff is very interesting. The ability to be like, is it worth it to do all this effort to stop some new troops from forming? It's a little bit like pandemic curing. You're like, once we stop it, they don't come out. It is weird, though. The part you focused on about needing a troop feels like, to me, like, that's a good example of how this game forces you to remember little fiddly rules.
But I think
that
it makes
might
such
not
a
be
huge
important.
difference when you're playing. It would be so much easier, and it would change the tide so much easier. I do.
I mean, you just gotta, while you're walking, you can pick up people for free.
You say that,
you just
but
gotta remember to carry someone with you.
There's at least 5 times a game when I'm like, oh, I could go No, I don't. There's no soldier on my way. I don't have one with me. I can't do it.
I feel like you could just be walking.
I reminded you a number of times.
Oh yes, I forget it. I forget the rule. But that's the problem. The problem is I've forgotten it. Not that like, it feels like maybe everyone should pick up a soldier on their way. Like, you're not forced to fight with them.
Well, I think that's
they can walk through a whole army and they don't get hurt.
That's something actually interesting as well. I think there's a limited pool, and this isn't a new idea. This is War of the Ring has this. You can make orcs all day, but when soldiers die, when the free peoples die, they're gone forever. You cannot replace those pawns.
Oh, is that right? Uh-huh.
Which is a really cool idea, because the orcs are just coming out of the orcai are coming out of pits, and the orcs have multiplied. There's like a lot. So I think that's kind of a cool thing, but also, it does, when you have a limited amount of people, it feels more oppressive that enemy is going to grind you down and kill you. And here, you can't. There's a limited amount of people to spawn for the free peoples.
Yes.
Like, there's like an event, like, take people from one place and put it in another, and I'm always like, well, we can't leave any place undefended. There's like one guy in each spot. It's real. You always are, the underdog, which is what what the story is. You're the underdog, right? And you always feel like that. You can never eliminate all the enemies. You never leave, and you're never like, oh, well, this is defended. I've got enough troops here, and I'll take some over here. No, you're like, I really got to need these troops, but I can't leave this undefended.
And it also has that.
It's always underdog.
It has that feature where you're like, we could break it by doing this. Then you realize, like, oh, okay, that doesn't work because we run out of these, or we run out of cards, or you run like everything you think you could just go all in on something, you can't. You're never going to be able to go all in and break it.
Well, we had that idea we mentioned before, which was to kind of capture the enemy strongholds and prevent them from making troops,
that was
and then just push Frodo through. But the reality of the situation is that we really lost a lot of cities, even though we had captured 7 enemy cities or whatever. I mean, we really destroyed the enemy cities, and yet we still were getting mopped up in the areas where there were troops. So it is very hard, that aspect of the game.
Yeah.
Okay. I want to mention it.
But I want to talk about something I realized we didn't talk about mechanically, which is another big change from Pandemic, which is fascinating, which is the tokens. The preparing tokens.
Yes.
I'd say fascinating design decision. I think if you look at it, you can see one of the main reasons it had to be done. So let's just go over the rule. Yeah. You've got a 7-card limit, but when you're in a haven, you can, as an action, turn the card into a token, which then you can keep and doesn't affect your hand limit. And hand limit pressure is a huge part of Pandemic. It's a huge part here. You're throwing away cards, you need them. So that action is a fascinating action. And I think one of the reasons it had to be invented is because of this 5 rings have to make it to the can't be done early. You have to do all those objectives first, which means in the beginning, if those rings are coming out, you have to have some way to preserve them for the end of the game. It feels to me like that was the starting motivation for that. But it is an interesting extra little decision point about, and frequently you do it if you can't do anything else, but it is interesting, that decision.
There's 2 things going on there, which is really fascinating. Yeah. It's a rather it's not 2 things, but a trade. So what you're doing is you have 2 things that are very important, right? It's the ability to have cards. There's the card economy or whatever, right? That you're pulling cards in your hand. You're trading cards, right? And the other one, and that's a limited resource. The other limited resource you have is your actions. And so what you're doing is you're trading one of your precious resources, which is your action, for more hand size. So you're depleting one resource to gain another resource, right? Which is a really interesting decision. And I think also this game has, because in Pandemic, you're I can get rid of a couple of cubes here or what. I find that most games of Pandemic, you don't waste any actions. This game, the way it's set up, because there's so many weird things and characters and different off-the-wall rules, I feel like there's a lot of times, a significant amount of times, comparatively, not a ton, but comparatively to the game,
I think that's right.
that I'll be like, I don't have anything else to do, and so you'll just use an action or 2 because you're out of haven or whatever, and you'll get a couple tokens just to free your hand up a little bit.
I think that's right. And with that card hand token thing, the one thing is it's very clever. On the other hand, one of the most enjoyable parts of Pandemic, the agonizing thing that you're confronted with constantly in Pandemic, is discarding cards. You're like, oh my God, we need this card when we have a limited amount of the deck we can get through. And they're so precious for cures that it really hurts to throw away cards or waste cards or collect too much. And it does feel like you can work a little bit around. Very rarely were we discarding cards in this game.
Yeah, I think and it's interesting because in this game you have so many more characters, meaning you could be spread out and it would be easier to trade cards. But we traded cards almost never. It was very rare. It was a few times a game maybe, if it was convenient. But it does feel harder to travel around as well. The other game you can fly to another part of the world, and you really can't do that here. So although it's interestingly kind of cool, there is a rule. Gandalf moves around very quickly with Shadowfax, very thematic, but you can't bring troops because he's on Shadowfax. Again, that's another kind of really
narratively
cool thing.
Nice.
Okay, there's one last thing I want to talk about, which is I've never seen in any other game. This is really a wild thing, and that's the eye in the Nazgul. So the Nazgul are always searching for the ring, and there are effects that will move the eye to Frodo's location, and then effects on the cards will slowly pull all the Nazgul
or not
in,
so slowly,
or not so slowly, and
Uh-huh.
then that's like becomes very, very dangerous, and it's like this weird economy of like you have to be able to spend cards to move him stealthily to get away from the Nazgul in the eye, and you got to be careful. You can't go where there's a lot of enemy troops. You can't move around easily where there's a lot of Nazgul. But if he starts searching, you're cooked. I mean, because you will die. You will lose enough hope to die. So it's really this fascinating thing. And then you can move him out of a region and away from the Nazgul and not have to pay like a big, fee to do it. And then you have to keep moving Frodo, which is thematic. You can't let him sit there. You can't just let him sit in the Shire all game because the Nazgul are coming, which is also thematic. He's got to get out of the Shire quickly, although 17 years maybe in the book or whatever it is. But, I think that's such a weird thing. And then you have a battle and the eye looks, because that's something important happening. And it's a way to keep distracting him. That's the whole point of the Black Gate at the end of the books and film, is that they're distracting Sauron so that Frodo can get in. And you're doing that over the course of the whole game. You're moving that eye around.
Well, that is the most interesting thing.
It's
also,
really
the easiest to forget. Like, I'll bet there's a lot of people who are playing this game and forgetting to move the eye, or how strategic a decision that is. I have a mixed feeling about this eye and the Nazgul. I mean, it's fascinating. It's so weird.
It's no other game.
Yeah, but the really weird thing about it is, like, those aren't affecting any other player on the board but Frodo. And they're such a large looking force, but
no, that's not true actually.
No, I'm just saying, looking at the
but
board.
When they are in a region when you have a battle and you roll that die, they'll come and kill two soldiers.
But it's very rare that it happens, and so it's so cool. Weird. Like, it's so cool and weird, but in practice, we've played in the games we've played. Like, I remember the one game that I was playing Frodo, I was just like, okay, my job as Frodo every turn is just move from where the eye is to where the eye isn't. And almost always, those Nazguls are we just put them in a region. Maybe with more players, it would be more risky. But as 2-player game, those Nazgul are very, very rarely where we're doing any action.
I say that, but that's how we lost last time.
Well, so the point is, it's weird. They don't affect any other players. They just force Frodo to walk around him. It feels like in reality, they're just causing Frodo to do busy work. There's a little bit of strategy, like you have to constantly get him away from the eye. But then if you get unlucky, it ends the game. So it's like, if you forget, and that's how I feel like we lost games. We lost games mainly because we're like, oh, I forgot that Frodo shouldn't be sitting here with this eye. Thematically wonderful. But it's like, you go from... the game ends in one turn because you get weird cards with the Nazgul. Thematically great, just a little swingy, weird.
That part is a little. If you have a bunch of Nazgul get into an area, through cards or whatever, or if the eye moves to Frodo and he's in a bad spot, if you move it away and then something moves it back and then something makes it search,
then you're in trouble.
You get a double whammy. You could lose the game instantly because you could roll a lot of dice against him. And again, I think that's one of the things that makes this game so unique, is that you're doing these two kind of wildly different things. You're trying to like fight a war, but you're also trying to make sure that's how you'd explain this game. Like, if you were explaining to a layperson, well, mostly you're trying to get rid of these enemy troops and keep them from attacking your cities and ruining them. But also you have one piece that's like the king of the piece, kind of like your king in chess or something, that you have to keep that away from the enemy, who's constantly like, because there is no breathing room. You're always worried about what happens to Frodo, which is thematic and also kind of part of the game, that you're constantly got to make sure that he's safe and take the time to do so. So it's really interesting.
I agree. Although I guess I would put a little bit of a more negative spin on it. If I would describe it like, one person's going to be controlling Frodo, and their job is just busy work. They're just going to look at the board and move him when you can away from where the eye is, and keep him out of trouble. Keep him away from the other people. And the other people are basically just going through the goals, trying to be smart about it, but not as a long-term plan. The Frodo character is just walking around until he gets the cards he needs. Yeah. Occasionally you might have to try to trade him and give him something or escort him in. Yeah. But most of his work is just the busy work. The Nazgul, dealing with the Nazgul,
you can make the argument that going around and cleaning up the other enemies and stuff is busy work too. It's all busy work.
It's true.
Yeah.
Busy work is
It
not
just
the
feels
criticism it sounds like. I just mean that the decisions for
Mm.
Frodo don't seem all that interesting.
Yeah. Okay, so what?
I spent a whole game moving him between
Yeah.
just all the eyes in Nazgul are here. Okay, move him here where he's safe. All the eyes in Nazgul go here. Move him here where he's safe. Maybe with larger player count, maybe you'd have to think about other stuff.
So if you, so what do you think? What was your favorite character to play?
Oh, favorite character. I mean, I think that woman who gets to look at the deck is just crazy overpowered. But I'm not sure I have a favorite. I had ones that I didn't like. Like I don't the Gimli. I don't want to pick on Gimli, but
you didn't pick on Gimli a lot.
That seems ridiculous. But I don't know if I have a favorite. I like them all. I tend to like the simpler characters. What about you? What you have a favorite there?
I mean, I really like Gandalf. I like how you can move around fast and you have to make those decisions.
Yeah.
He's really good in battle, and I do think like when you have that thing when he fights the Balrog, it's such a cool. Like you want to try to plan it, so that he doesn't. And of course, I really like playing with Gollum. I think that makes it much more interesting to play Frodo because I feel like you can take different routes and you can be more careful about how you do things, right? Like I think that's kind of like it oftentimes seems like he's like you say, like you can completely lose with him if you get wrong things with cards, but Gollum can kind of keep him safe, which is part of the books, of course. But I think when if I have to play Frodo, I think it's much more interesting to use Gollum to do that.
I do. Let me just say this: I do think the star of this for me, the highlight of this game for me, is the variable player synergies and powers. To me, the fact that picking the different players feels like you have to rethink how you're going to play this game, and that I love.
Yeah. And again, these.
Well, we disagree about the objectives.
Okay. Well.
Yeah.
I mean,
I'm so curious to hear what your final rating
just like on its face, there are the mechanism-wise. Let's sum it up. Like, I think the 3-in-1, having two characters and getting 4-in-1 and deciding the order of that is really fascinating, and I would love to see that at work more. I think it allows you to have so much more flexibility strategically. It gets you more of the characters in the world. What a fascinating thing. This Eye and the Nazgul, this double mission of these dual things, mechanism-wise, is really interesting, I think. I mean, it really is a unique puzzle that you've not seen in any other game. I think as it's hard to imagine from a thematic standpoint, like how you could ever do a better job of illustrating the Lord of the Rings. This is like, to me, like, it is just, you're going to ring it out, man. And I mean, it is like every facet of this is super thematic. It's wild and large in scope. And I think the variability is there. It's very, very, very varied. I think there's a lot of different characters. There's a lot of different objectives, story-wise and stuff. They're all very, thematic. I think that's so very cool. I think every bit of this that you're playing, you are making a lot of plans. I think that's like, there's a lot of different planning, a lot of different plans being pitched. You're always really immersed in what's happening in the game. I think the production is fantastic. I do think the board is a little too small, but again, I don't know what else they were going to do to fit all this in. So I think the production, surprisingly, yes, it is a lot of bandwidth. I think it was fairly easy to get to the table considering how epic and large of the scale this is. I do think like the two knocks I would have against it are that, and I understand why they are that way, but I think, yes, the ending of the very ending of the game is always going to be sort of the same because you're doing that last objective, always the same objective. I think that's really, and then as I said, the size of the board.
So what would you rate it?
Excuse me again. Sorry, this cold starting, so you're going to get sick for sure. I think I would rate this. I'm gonna put it at a 10. I think so. I think like, because I'm such a huge Lord of the Rings fan, I don't think this is a great game for everyone. By the way, I do think if you're a fan of Lord of the Rings, this is the game for you. I think if you're not a fan of Lord of the Rings, go pick a different game because you're going to lose too much, and you're going to not only lose too much by not understanding and appreciating and enjoying those thematic moments, but at the same time, you're not going to. You're also going to lose the ability to understand what's happening, as like I said, like the flow of the game, where the armies will go and things like that. So I think both on a mechanism side and also on a but yeah, there's a lot of interesting mechanisms going on here that I haven't seen in any other games, which I find very fascinating and interesting puzzle. So I think I'm putting it at a 10.
Pandemic fan and Lord of the Rings super fan, it's a 10. I think that makes a lot of sense.
That's what you predicted, probably.
Yeah, I think that's what I would predict. I'm not sure I would predict a 10, but it makes sense. All right, let me give some. So as you might expect, I had come at it with from a slightly different perspective. Yeah. I think I would probably rate it an 8.
Oh yeah, okay.
But now let me talk about. I do think this is a much heavier weight game than Pandemic that requires a lot more bandwidth. I do think there's some deep strategy here, and I think this would reward repeated plays, and you would get to be better at it, and some of the problems of the busyness and noise would start to go away. Other parts of the wouldn't. The randomness of the troop movement, there's too much missing from that I love. Part of what I love about Pandemic is how elegant and clean and simple it is, and how you can make plans and anticipate, and all of that is missing here. I think if you're not a Lord of the Rings person and you don't have a Lord of the Rings person to play with, this is a tougher sell because it's already too long. I do feel like it's a little too long. I would classify it as too long. Like, I want long epic games, but the nature of it and the nature of an instant loss feels like it's a little mismatched in length. And if you don't know where anything is, it's getting a little bit troublesome. But the one thing I do want to compliment it on is, you said how narratively rich it is. I think there needs to be an extra statement tacked on to that, because we live in a world now of story-driven narrative sort of adventure games, and it's easy to see a narratively rich Lord of the Rings game that is about story and reading and storytelling. This is a hardcore war game, strategy game that doesn't bog you down. You're not reading and having this thing. You're playing a serious adventure game, but it's filled with the thematics all over it. So from my standpoint, it's a mixed bag here. I don't love all the changes. I don't love all the directions it's going. I love to see the experimentation. I would love to see a re-theming in a more minimalistic, simpler version of some of these mechanics that was much easier to read. Like, here's just a good example. The idea of having troops moving that you have to plan for is cool, but because it's too much and too hard to see, it sort of gets thrown out the window for me. It can't be planned around. I would love to see more of a system where things are moving around and you can plan a little bit more.
You have it. It's Fall of Rome.
It's a little bit Fall of Rome. Even Fall of Rome's a little hard to see for me where things are going. But I agree, Fall of Rome, there's lots of different things about the Pandemics, but this is not my perfect Pandemic, not my favorite by a long shot, but I love to see more experimentation.
I really don't like that. Compare it. I feel like it's an
You think it should? I've heard people say, like, don't even think of it as Pandemic.
I do. I think
I see the Pandemic here, so, but yeah, your mileage may vary. All right, so 10, 8, but still a joy. And I do think if you're the kind of group that would play it over and over again, it would probably get better, except for that repetitive ending. If you have one person who's a Lord of the Rings fan, I think that's enough. That's enough to get some real enjoyment out of it.
I do think you wouldn't have gotten very far if it wasn't for me in this.
I think it would have been
like, right. I don't mean that like, no, I mean it like, I mean just for me to point out, like, there's Darwinian, you know what I mean?
It would slow down an already long game. But also it helps to hear a little bit of the, you don't need to be fully invested if you're with someone who's like excited about it. And the fact that it still shocks me that you knew where everything is. Like, any of these cities come up,
it's not really a good thing. I think like that's not winning me anything in life, is knowing where like
a big chunk of your brain has been parasitically occupied by Lord of the Rings lore.
Yeah, I mean, it's not helping me at all. You know, I mean, that's not helping.
Yeah,
anything.
It's not making you any money.
Yeah. Okay. Well, that's a very long-winded. Wow, we've been really talking about this a lot. We knew we would be, you know. But I mean, I think this was a kind of good because you have a completely different, you know, like, we're going at it completely differently, right? Like, you are not a Lord of the Rings fan. I'm a Lord of the Rings. So, but we both share that Pandemic thing. So I think this was a very good way to get two completely different.
It's also so ambitious, right? Second to the legacy Pandemics. This is the most ambitious spin-off and new mechanics.
That's true. Especially because, like I said, there are some such fresh ideas in here.
Yeah, there are.
But yeah. All right. Well, thanks for joining us.